Welcome to the Wolf Power Club, the weekly podcast where we discuss energy, industry and politics. Well, welcome to the Wolf Power Club podcast, the biggest podcast on energy that is on the Apple charts. Now this week, it's been an unbelievably busy January for Donald Trump. So at the start of the month, before he'd even come inaugurated president, was only president-elect, he had to go at the British government about the North Sea oil tax. And we're going to look at that as Apache left, what his reasons were, and why we actually think Trump is winning on that. The next bit we're going to look at is then this week he's been talking to the Saudi prince about OPEC and its role in production and its role in the Ukraine-Russia war, and basically increasing production to lower taxes and change the oil price. And then there is an absolutely massive thing, tariffs, world tariffs. Trump wasn't even at Davos, but his video message and his conference call was the main talking point about Davos. This is the impact the man's having. On this week's Wolf Power Club, we are looking at, therefore, is Trump winning on North Sea oil, on OPEC and on tariffs? It's going to be a great listen, great many debates, and it's fair to say the Donald is back in town. So now let's look at the scene set. What are we talking about North Sea oil and Donald Trump's involvement? Well, what we're talking about is in the very, very first week of January, Donald Trump has latched onto Apache, the Texas-based energy company that's been in the North Sea oil for some considerable time, saying that one of the main reasons they have left and announced they're leaving, that they're basically going to be selling off their assets and looking to close down operations by 2029, is that essentially because of the UK's government's energy levy, that essentially the taxation is too high to make the basin profitable. So there's a big text that created world debate that suddenly put the Scottish government and the British government in a defensive position about why the levy's in place, when both world leaders from business and politics are challenging it. We then had the inauguration, and I think the symbolism of the inauguration was unbelievable. Now, many people might choose the start of their electoral campaigns, to put their main issues forward. And I think the symbolism here is that we had the world leading social media organisations all in attendance. So, and it was a big nod that e-commerce, AI is going to be a foundation of Trump's next 4 years. So you obviously had Amazon's Jeff Bezos, from Meta you had Mark Zuckerberg, obviously from X you had Elon Musk, and you also had the lead people from Apple and Google all sat together in the inauguration. And it's probably going to be one of those powerful photos that gets shown again and again over the next 4 years. And where you can see sort of the step change difference from other governments is that it's actually probably been a long time that a government has put business leaders first as its symbolism. Sometimes they might choose, military or national defence, or they might choose environmental issues, such as the British government has done. But what America has done is put that oligarchy of the tech boys as the forefront of actually the symbolism, and that would have all been arranged by Trump to make sure that, and his team, to make sure that's the message they get across. And then at the World Economic Forum, Donald Trump didn't even attend in person, but essentially from quite a quiet Davos, you have the situation that his conversations about where OPEC should be going with energy prices and production and relationships to the Ukraine war has been dominating the headlines. And the other thing that's been dominating the headlines is world tariffs. I think every government around the world now is looking at, do they have a trade surplus or trade deficit with the US on various products? Because obviously if they are in a position where they're buying more from the US, there's a real challenge, and we will go into this and look at what's happened. So basically you have an opening January where also, and I think where it's perhaps very, very different from say 8 years ago, is that 8 years ago this was a businessman learning to become a politician. You've now got Trump's team having done 4 years as president. They know they've only got 4 years in office going forward, and essentially he has started off with such a massive impact that we already think, from that symbolism of putting business centre, putting tech centre, that Trump is winning and he's setting the world agenda. Even at Davos, you'll see that the guy who organises Davos is like, please come in person next year. So whatever people are thinking about Trump, he is setting the world agenda right now, and that impact is probably one of the most powerful opening weeks of inaugurated president that I can certainly ever remember in our lifetime, and certainly Wolf Power Club members. If you think someone's had a more, big opening 10 days, please let us know in the comments section. So now we go on to look at the North Sea oil issue specifically. And I think we have to ask ourselves, well, why does Trump even have an interest of essentially part of the energy sector that, although it has some significance to the US, it probably is not in their sort of, top handful of trading places. It's not sort of in its country's big investments. But then you actually have to look at the history of Trump himself and his relationship to Scotland. And I actually think overall, as someone who works for a American-owned Scottish company, I actually think it's really, really exciting times, and I'm very, very big fan of that this can be built on. But let's look at the detail, because I think it's more than just statements and words. Let's look at the history of Donald Trump. So I think first of all, and people might say, it's not that important, but I think when you know that Donald Trump's mother comes from Tong, he always mentions it Stormway, so that's slightly difference in location, is that, there's an emotional attachment there. So of all the hundreds of countries that a US president will be trying to be courted by and so on, there's already attachment. You then look at his own personal business life, and I think, look, when you do business, you're obviously looking for return on capital employed, you're looking at sustainability, you're looking at, ultimately, is it going to be financially in my interest? But you also invest in things that you've both got a passion about and a geographical area that you like to be. And with Trump, he already owns 2 world-class golf courses in Scotland, with obviously the most famous being Turnberry. But there's also a slightly different factor. He employs 600 people, outside his political life, in his business life in Scotland. There's not many employers in Scotland that employ north of 600 people. And therefore you can see that this is not just about quotes on X or quotes on Twitter. This is a guy who is financially invested into the region in a way that other people just haven't. And then you look at the security importance of the north flank of NATO between Shetland and the Faroe Islands. It's always been a very, very important strategic area in the world. If you've ever got the opportunity to go to Shetland and Orkney, whether it's things like the Churchill Barriers, or you can see the fleet that sailed from there over to Russia. We've always seen the importance of NATO security in that Shetland Faroe Island gap, and the USA have a nuclear base in the Clyde. So the relationship between Trump and Scotland isn't going to go anywhere. And I think when he sees economic disadvantages, and people talk about tariffs from the US, but essentially the energy profit levy on the North Sea oil basin that's higher than anywhere else in the world, that seems very unpredictable. It doesn't seem to be that actually it's reducing when the time of the oil prices come down to mid-70s. It was put in place during the Ukraine war when it was over 130s. Is that essentially he's also got a Texas-based energy company in Apache, saying it's one of the key reasons that they are reducing operations in North Sea oil and will be leaving. And since the energy profit levy has come in place, we've seen that Total reducing their position up in the North Sea oil. We've seen Shell and Equinor say that they are going to be leaving and forming a new company separate from their other operations. We've also obviously had Apache say their piece. So we're having consistently the oil and gas companies from the world community making very, very clear business statements. You then have other stakeholders that are still there and protecting the interests, from the OEUK that I work a lot with, through to companies like BP, Serica, Spirit, who have all spoken out about how the energy profit levy won't help energy transition of oil and gas up in Scotland, but actually what it would do is potentially lose the jobs of 200,000 people in an unmeasured and uncharacteristic way. So what we're saying is, look to the British government. Trump has put on an opportunity here that essentially you revise the energy profit levy. That will be a way to build the relationship with the new organisation of the American government. We also see it as ways that if you consistently lay out the actual transition of oil and gas, and it will be those people who actually open up investment opportunity, whereas at the moment it's pushing away. Now, what we don't want to see is the forecast of the likes of Apache being correct, that they see North Sea oil production in the next 12 months being 20% less than the previous year. It's been in a slow decline. We need to really address this tax issue. We know Rachel Reeves is having a lot of criticism at the moment, but I feel on this issue it's fair. This is something that's been brought in by the British government. It wasn't her government, it was the previous government, but it's been increased by this government. And we think, well, this is the time to actually readdress the issue and say that actually for a steady energy transition, good investment and the protection of jobs, we need to put back on. So actually the reason why the Wolf Power Club feels that Trump is winning is he's put this on the agenda on a global scale. He's given it a highlight and a preference, not just using X, but essentially millions of people now are talking about what is Britain going to do next in the North Sea oil space. We're going to have a lot of specials this year where we talk to the key experts on it. And we also think in a month's time at the International Energy Week, it's going to be one of the biggest issues that's discussed across the board. So we say that actually the reason Trump is winning is he has used his position, American interest, and the fact that he is an investor in Scotland himself to actually address this issue, which everyone's been speaking about, that this energy profit levy is actually escalating Britain and its resources. The other thing that's fascinating is there was a survey carried out in the last week that said Scots, 2/3 of Scots, when 1,000 were interviewed, actually believe that they would rather national security of energy coming from oil and gas in Scotland than us buying it imported from other nations. I recently was on JM's YouTube channel, and some of the comments were amazed at how much we import as a country and we don't actually, do ourselves. This has become a real national issue of national defence, and we actually feel that, again, it's being looked at by the public now because you have an international government like America challenging British tax policy, which I can't ever really recall happening many times in recent years. So the agenda is set, we need to act now, and essentially I look forward to Rachel Reeves coming back to Donald Trump on the North Sea oil, but also coming back to companies here, employees here. There's 200,000 people, and all those jobs are the people employed by Aberdeen. We're passionate about protecting the industry at the Wolf Power Club, and therefore we really hope that Trump winning on it and setting the agenda brings it back into our space. So now, listeners, we really want to look at OPEC. And what I love about Donald Trump, and there's many things that people might but he takes on this whole concept. You can't say this, you can't do that, you can't interfere with that. You will never be able to change things. And that's always been a huge assumption over the world energy price, and that world politics, world events, although it changed the forecast and escalating, everyone you ever meet comes back to saying the same thing. No individual thing can shift it enough or change it enough to work. So potentially, if you are looking at is Trump winning on OPEC, then probably a lot of people will come back in the comments and say, it's not going to change anything, it's nothing new on the agenda, and essentially, it's not moving the debate on. I think where it is moving the debate on is this Route 1 clear clarity of where Trump is and the US government is on it. And it was very interesting. So on Wednesday, he met with the Saudi Crown Prince, MBS, and basically he has said the following. He's like, look, I want to end the Ukraine-Russia war. We feel that 30% of their treasury money does come from international oil and gas exports. While the price of oil and gas is at this rate, it keeps the war going. And where I think we would agree on the analysis is that ever since the conflict started, people have still bought from Russia. Although EU, UK, US have put sanctions in place, that void has then been filled by market take-up by the likes of China and India, and it's basically kept on fueling the financial income to Vladimir Putin's war chest to take on Ukraine. Look, we're passionate. We think it's outrageous what's happening to Ukraine at the moment. And essentially this is what Trump has said to the Saudi Crown Prince and OPEC members. Ultimately, Saudi Arabia is believed to have 3 million barrels of capacity a day that they're not using at the moment to keep this steady mid-$70 oil price. United Arab Emirates has another 1 million barrels of oil a day, and that's 4 million barrels of oil that's not being produced. On the flip side, Russia is exporting and selling about 6.6 million barrels a day. So you can see where this argument is coming from the US government, that if an extra 4 million barrels just from those two nations came and the rest of OPEC came in, then essentially it would bring down the price and it would take away the financial benefit from Russia. The problem is it takes away from the benefit of OPEC members, and this is why it's difficult to move on. But I do feel that actually Saudi Arabia does look for opportunities to build relationships and have good discussions and have great public relations. I think what's interesting though is Russia is what's called an OPEC Plus member, and I think where the nervousness will be from countries about doing extra production on this specific regional issue is what about when they're having a regional issue and a war and a conflict that they feel the world community might not agree with. And I think therefore there's many stumbling blocks on economic wealth and so on. But I actually understand Donald's argument, and I think where there is a win on it is this approach that he's not going to back down from speaking to anyone. He's straight into the business matters and international matters, and therefore it's not just a case of a regime that's looking at internal policy. It's a new government that is trying to change the world financial positioning. And therefore I think that although there probably won't be extra production, when there comes an opportunity for Saudi Arabia on their agenda to increase production, such as they feel that OPEC and OPEC Plus members aren't sticking to the quotas, they can actually now use this symbolic argument that the reason we're doing it is not to harm OPEC or OPEC Plus, but we actually want to stop a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So I think what's very clever, and again it goes to this symbolism point on winning, is that it creates an opportunity for Saudi to have an out due to what Donald Trump has said, and very publicly said it at the World Economic Forum. And now this leads nicely into tariffs. This has been talked about ever since last autumn. What is America first, America great again, and world tariffs going to happen? And certainly it is clear that President Trump has used the platform of the World Economic Forum at Davos to restate this point. And basically the point was the following this week. He said, if you bring investment, industry and jobs to America, you will have low taxes. If though you choose not to invest in America, you choose not to produce in America, there will be tariffs coming. And people have talked as much as, tariffs going up 20%. There's obviously nations across the world very nervous where their trade position with the US means that certain economies and certain productions are absolutely vital that they keep the US trading. On the flip side, there's other things that the US brings in that if there's a tit for tat going on the tariffs that they could hinder. And I think that every government will be looking at what position of strength are they in or aren't in. But essentially, where we thought it was very good at the World Economic Forum in terms of setting out and putting in place, is that we feel that also going back to what we opened with in the inauguration, America's in a very different position than just a pure tariff and pure manufacturing thing. And by the way, guys, that has been something that trading blocs have done for time immemorial. Ever since, like the 1980s, the European Union, to protect Europe's car industry, were very clear that essentially if you were to be external to the EU, where the cars are physically made, you had limitations on how many cars you could sell in Europe, sometimes as low as 1,200 cars. What that obviously led to is across Europe, the likes of your Toyotas, the likes of your Nissans, investing in big plants and big investment structures so that production happened in Europe. The ultimate was that obviously Nissan formed with the likes of Renault and Peugeot to create one group, but also Nissan opened up when Britain was still part of the EU, big factories in Sunderland, and Toyota did likewise in Wales. So this thing of actually producing our nations, so therefore either avoid tariff restrictions or export restrictions, is not a new thing. I think where there is a big new thing, and where US outside of trade surplus and deficit suddenly has a huge point to play, and we saw this actually in the inauguration, and those guys from the likes of Amazon, Google, Meta and so on, and X, is that I think America has two things in addition to the normal surplus and deficit trade position. essentially now American companies all own the biggest marketing channels in the world for most customer products. Now, I've got interest in various businesses, from AI to children's nurseries, to this podcast. But the reality is that the platforms all of those businesses use to essentially promote their services is essentially American-owned, platforms. Meta used hugely by small and big business to promote and sell their services. Google, where you rank on Google, your search engine optimization in countries across the world is unbelievably important. And then you look at the likes of X in terms of getting messaging across, and then the actual infrastructure of delivery. If you're selling goods, Amazon is hugely important in so many world economies. Now, obviously, we've got the thing at the moment where non-American owned business, in terms of TikTok being Chinese owned, by the last American administration, was banned due to national security issues, and also slightly because the X has been banned in China. But essentially, where they've got something is that in addition to the trade area, most countries in the world now use those platforms, and they've got very high barriers to entry to get past in terms of customer usage and in terms of the amount of people that use them to really actually challenge. And therefore there will be a strong relationship with America, whatever business you're doing, from a pure marketing point of view. The other bit where I think we've seen a massive trade divide open up, and it's something that I think all governments are thinking about now, is that raising capital in America has come easier to do than most other places on earth. And not only raising the capital, but also the legal infrastructures, so that actually your capital is protected for investors once it's done. Now, what that means is that both marketing and raising funds are stronger in the US than anywhere else. I think one of the things the British government has to look at is how we can bring back that essentially the City of London retakes a stranglehold on raising capital for markets. But what I feel it means is that when you then look at the tariff debate and the tariff issues, if more and more companies are raising funds, opening up American divisions, they are using American tools to market, it means that essentially the negotiating position of others will be in a place where they need to actually woo America and will have to embrace themselves to tariffs rather than. It'll be interesting to see the counter actions. But the other thing I thought was unbelievably big time was this was doubled down on at the World Economic Forum at Davos. But what was amazing was Trump wasn't even there. He called in on a video call and Davos asked it. So I think it's been a very, very powerful January for Donald Trump. We feel that actually he's put onto the agenda the energy levy from the point of a foreign national government and the American company Apache pulling out, saying that's one of the main causes, and I think that will help the people of Aberdeen and North Sea oil. We think on OPEC he's probably going to get less traction, so I think the win is debatable.